2026, and our dear friend or brother Laith Marouf from Beirut is here with us. Welcome back, Laith.
Great to be with you, Nima.
Laith, let's start with the war and what's going on between Lebanon and Israel. Israel is bombing Beirut without informing, giving some sort of warning, and we're gonna hit this neighborhood, that neighborhood. What is going on in terms of the attacks on the part of Israelis and the way that Hezbollah is responding?
Yeah, I mean, last night around 2:33 a.m., the Zionists attacked multiple neighborhoods in the core downtown area of Beirut. On residential buildings, there's at least 14 martyrs, mainly families that were sleeping. One of those apartments that were hit was the apartment of the manager of the political programming on Al Manar television, and he was martyred, him and his wife. So it was a direct assassination on a journalist, on a producer of media. This is now, of course, 2.5 years of us watching the Zionists kill journalists and media producers. In fact, after these 2.5 years of this war, the Zionists managed to kill more journalists on this planet than all the wars combined from World War I till now. This is a kind of a magnificent number. I think that we can't imagine, how much. And this is true, of course, for medical staff, also the largest combined number of medical staff killed. There's just since the beginning of this round of war in Lebanon, over the last 14 days, they've killed over, more than 40 medical workers. And, this is not to mention the number of children, women. On average, right now, since the beginning of this round of war here in Lebanon, the Israelis are killing 6 children a day in Lebanon. So this is infanticide, medicide, all of the things that we can imagine about genocide. The Zionists seem to be the champions of that in human history. In terms of the resistance, in the south of Lebanon, it's wave after wave of attempted invasion. And even when they announced 2 days ago that they're doing the big invasion, this was like the 6th or 7th time they announced that. So people should take that with a grain of salt. But even with the thousands of raids on the villages in the south, the Zionists last night had to withdraw from even the sides of villages that they were attempting to occupy. And over the last 24 hours, Hezbollah destroyed at least 10 Merkava tanks. And so that's the number is just piling up in 15 days since the battle started in the south of Lebanon. I think the number is close to 30 tanks destroyed. So this is a huge number. There's already 45,000 Zionist troops on the border. They're mobilizing more, but it doesn't seem to be helping them, because the more they mobilize close to the border of Lebanon, the easier they are as targets for the artillery, missiles, and drones of Hezbollah. Hezbollah keeps on hitting the gathering points inside occupied Palestine, in the north of occupied Palestine, and continues to fire ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, long-range drones, all the way to the Tel Aviv region. And this is combined, of course, with the Iranian waves after waves of missiles that are hitting much of those same targets. So this is kind of the overall of what is happening here in Lebanon.
It seems that there is some sort of coordination between Iran and Hezbollah in terms of attacking, for example, the northern part of Israel. And do you see that happening, or it's happening just without planning for it?
Definitely there is coordination. And each member of the axis of resistance has sets of targets that they are concentrating on. Even when we talk about the Iraqi resistance, what targets is it hitting inside the Zionist colony or inside Iraq or in Jordan and Kuwait, as we've seen them. So there's an overall coordination, and each component of the axis of resistance has a list of targets that they are prioritizing. But as we see, there is bases in the north of Palestine, in the occupied Golan Heights, that the Iranian aerospace forces are the ones that are hitting. And those are the ones that have huge bunkers under them and so on. And we constantly see these massive ballistic missiles hitting them from Iran. And that's something clearly to help the resistance in South Lebanon have less surveillance on it, or the capabilities of the Zionists to control and command their troops in the area border with Lebanon. So yes, there's coordination, there's specific targets for each of the components, and they are going through these lists of targets in a clear escalatory ladder manner. So we didn't see Hezbollah or Iran target the main bases from the beginning. Clearly they had a priority to take out air defense and communication hubs for the Zionists. And now, as we see, the Hezbollah missiles and drones are reaching their targets much easier, because after 2 weeks of destroying the air defenses of the Zionist colony and their command and control and or communication link-ups, it's becoming easier and easier for Hezbollah and other members of the Axis to hit their targets.
Laith, do you see anytime soon a ground invasion of Lebanon happening? Because Israelis are talking about a 450, they're talking about 450 reservists to be called to join the army in Israel, IDF. And what is the understanding of Hezbollah or in Lebanon of the quality of these fighters? Because you have the main army, you have the reservists coming to the battleground. What is the perception of that?
Well, last night we saw a picture released by Smoltrich of him, standing over the bed of his son in the ICU, because his son was targeted for the first day of his deployment in the north of Palestine. So if this is the fate of the son of the major, one of the main ministers in the Zionist colony, you could that most probably had a lot of protection on the ground and was not put into the front line. So you could imagine what's happening to the elite units of the Zionists that are right on the front lines. So clearly they are getting a beating. Clearly they're unable to enter the villages in the south of Lebanon, although they destroyed them completely. And throwing numbers like 450,000 reservists to be called, that's the number that the Zionist colony never in its whole history was able to mobilize. So I think it's a number that is partially fake, that it's impossible for them to reach it. So it's just propaganda to create some momentum, to make it that the Zionists feel that they have the numbers on their side. The other thing is that the more the Zionists push troops onto the border of Lebanon, the less they have to control the West Bank and Gaza. And we've seen the Iranian aerospace forces hit multiple targets in the West Bank over the last few days, as well as on the borders of occupied Gaza. So this must be worrying for the Zionists. This is why we see the settler colonist fascist rampaging wildly in the West Bank because they have now become the unofficial enforcement forces in the West Bank, because so much of the Israeli soldiers are being withdrawn from the West Bank and thrown onto the borders with Lebanon. And that's why we're seeing them now also rampaging, like raping a Palestinian man in the Jordan Valley yesterday in front of his children, and then killing him, and also raping women, as happened in another village. This is the norm now, because these colonists in the West Bank have presumed now the authority position with the withdrawal of the Israeli troops from there. So I don't know if they're actually going to be able to mobilize such a number. And I would say one more thing about this, that the more they are gathered in one place, these Israeli soldiers, the easier they are as a target. You can't just bring thousands of, hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the front line and have bunkers for all of them. You are not going to have bunkers for all of them. You're not going to bring thousands of tanks to the border with Lebanon and have shelter for these tanks from incoming ATGMs or missiles and so forth. So it is a desperate move to do so. And up until now, clearly, the Israelis have been, depending on their air power, as the Americans are also depending on their air power in Iran, and that is not going to win them a war. So they will have to risk the lives of these easy targets, and it will accelerate the collapse of their armed forces if they do so.
Laith, the Trump administration trying to bring, the HTS and Al Jolani from Syria to the battlefield to go against Lebanon and helping Israel. And it seems that they are hesitant to go in that direction. Do you feel that they're going to join? They're going to help Israel after all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fog of war right now that's making it hard for people to realize what's happening on the ground. But truth of the matter is that HTS is already involved. The battle that happened a week ago in Nebi Sheet in the Beqa Valley, when the Zionist special forces infiltrated and were, ambushed. This happened under the protection of the HTS. The Zionist invading troops drove through Syria, through the north parts of Damascus, under the protection of HTS, and then infiltrated from an illegal post, smuggling area in the Beqa and the Qalamun Mountains, under the protection of HTS. And there was a huge battle where the red bandanas, or the special forces of HTS, were slaughtered along with the Israelis who had to withdraw. Similarly, over the last 4 days, the Zionists took these red bandanas, the special forces of HTS, through the occupied Golan Heights and put them on the entrance of Shab'a village in the south of Lebanon. It's the most extreme eastern village in the border area of South Lebanon, right on the foothills of Jabal al-Sheikh or Mount Hermon. And the red bandanas were defeated in this little remote village that is not even Shia. Shab'a is a Sunni village. There is not many Hezbollah fighters there, but there is the Islamic group fighters, which is the kind of Sunni resistance group here in Lebanon that has been targeted by assassinations and so on over the last year and a half by the Zionists. So you could imagine this extremely remote village with like one road only going into it, being able to repel an invasion from the special forces of the HTS. What does this mean? That means that the HTS is unable really to change the balance of the battle, no matter what they do to appease their masters in Tel Aviv. And Up until now, they're just using their special forces. So one last thing I would say about this is that HTS as a whole, with the combined other Wahhabi death squads that they absorbed into them, their whole fighting force is around 30,000. Okay, so if Al-Jolani decides to use anything above and beyond the red bandanas, he would have to mobilize practically all of the HTS to the border of Lebanon, which will leave the borders with Iraq empty, which will leave also the major cities, Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, and so forth, and the whole coastline of Syria without the thugs controlling the population. And this will open the door for either the Iraqi resistance to invade and liberate parts of Syria, and or for a armed rebellion from the populations in the major cities or the coast to come into effect. And this will be the end of HTS. So I think that we shouldn't worry too much about the involvement of HTS. And if we see a major involvement of HTS, that's a signal of how desperate the imperialists are, because they will be risking losing the whole of Syria in order to try to defeat Hezbollah, which is a worst case scenario for them, and the best case scenario actually for the axis of resistance.
Laith, the war on Iran is bringing something out that we haven't seen before. The axis of resistance coming out the way that it was unimaginable, in my opinion, before this war started. And it's not all the power they possess. It's because we haven't seen Yemen being, involved. The Bubble Mandab, the Red Sea. But after all, looking at what the Iranian foreign minister just today or yesterday said on his interview with Al Jazeera, he said that we don't believe in a ceasefire. We believe in ending the war, and ending the war means exactly ending the war on all fronts. He's talking about Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Palestine, all together. It's not just about the war between Iran and the United States. And what are the leverage? I think what is happening is the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab. These are new alternatives coming to the calculation, coming to the equation on the part of the axis of resistance. How do you see the way that the axis of resistance is finding its power, its strength from within?
Yeah, when we look at the game theory of this war, when you lay out all the components of this war and you try to figure out in game theory the steps that each party will take, obviously you see that right now the axis of resistance has control of the escalation ladder. It doesn't mean that they have dominance in power and so forth, but it just means that it is the axis of resistance that's choosing the steps. And that's a huge advantage. The United States can just bombard anything it wants to at any moment, but the axis of resistance is choosing the stages of this war and how it's going to play out and how fast and how slow things go. And this is very important because the United States and the Zionist colony have a high dependency on air power, okay, and then after that naval power, and after that land power. And the axis of resistance is the opposite. It does depend on defense on the ground, and it has the cheap alternative to air force, which is usually the most expensive component of any military, with the drones and missiles. So the axis of resistance has a much more viable price tag on its military involvement financially, while the West has a much higher financial price tag on its involvement in this war. And therefore, as long as the axis of resistance can draw out this war, the West will the imperial powers will lose. It's 100% predicted. There's no way around it, except and only except if they use a nuclear weapon. And I think this is very doubtful at this moment. But what we will see is that over the next week, as the defeat of the empire becomes much more glaring in everybody's eyes, and the inability of the empire to protect its assets and its vassals in the region, becomes undeniable. We may see the involvement of ground troops of the United States, and the staging grounds for this will be most probably like Saudi Arabia, and therefore, this is when Yemen will enter the battle. I think this is another example of how the axis of resistance has control of the escalation ladder. Yemen doesn't need to enter right now. There needs to be another price tag on the next stage. The axis of resistance members, the other ones, are their involvement right now is sufficient to draw out and force the hand of the US to bring troops here.